When my husband joked about my body count at dinner with friends, I shot back that he wasn't even in my top 5 performers. The entire table went silent, and his face turned completely white. I could see the exact moment the words hit him, like watching someone get punched in slow motion. Tom just sat there staring at me for what felt like an eternity, while our friends looked anywhere but at us. The cheerful restaurant chatter around us continued, but at our table, you could have heard a pin drop. I immediately knew I'd crossed a line I could never uncross, but the damage was already done. Tom slowly pushed back his chair, stood up without saying a word, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me sitting there with 6 shocked faces staring back at me. The evening had started so perfectly. Tom had made the reservation at the restaurant a month in advance because Mike's promotion was such a big deal. Mike had been passed over for advancement twice before, and we all wanted to celebrate properly somewhere nice. The topic of dating and relationships came up naturally when Sarah mentioned helping her younger sister navigate the world of dating apps. The conversation evolved into sharing stories about our romantic histories, starting with harmless anecdotes about awkward first dates and college relationships gone wrong. Everyone was laughing and contributing stories, and the mood remained light and playful. Jennifer admitted with a laugh that she'd only had 3 serious boyfriends before Mike, which led to everyone sharing their numbers in what seemed like innocent fun. David confessed to being with 7 people before Sarah, while Sarah claimed only 4 previous partners, blushing as she said it. Mike boasted about his double-digit count before meeting Jennifer, who playfully smacked his arm and called him a shameless player. Then all eyes turned expectantly to Tom and me. He said he was lucky to have married someone who'd done such thorough research and quality control testing in the dating department, so he knew he was getting a quality product. He smiled as he said it, clearly thinking he was being supportive and showing that he was comfortable with my more extensive romantic history. But the comment hit me completely wrong. My number was 12 partners before Tom, significantly higher than anyone else's who'd shared, and I'd always been sensitive about being perceived as the promiscuous one in our friend group. Tom's comment, though clearly meant to be supportive, felt like he was putting my intimate history on display for everyone's entertainment and judgment. In that moment of humiliation and anger, I felt all my old insecurities and defensive mechanisms kick in. I wanted to wipe the smug look off his face and show him that having extensive experience meant I had standards and knew what good performance looked like. The cruel irony was that Tom was the first man who'd never made me feel like I needed those defenses. He'd accepted my romantic history without judgment, never made me feel ashamed of my choices, and loved me despite knowing I'd been with many others before him. He'd never used my past against me or made me feel like damaged goods. But when he made that joke about my experience, all my old insecurities came flooding back, and I reverted instantly to the person I'd been before I met him. Someone who used intimate knowledge as a weapon when she felt cornered. The words came out sharp and clear, cutting through the cheerful dinner conversation like a knife. "Well, you're not even in my top 5 performers." The sentence hung in the air, like a bomb waiting to explode, and I immediately knew I'd just destroyed the one relationship where I'd never needed to play games or protect myself. Tom's face went through a progression of emotions I'd never seen before and never wanted to see again. First came confusion, as if he couldn't quite process what I'd said or believe I'd actually spoken those words. Then understanding dawned, and I watched the meaning hit him fully, as he realized I'd just ranked his intimate performance in front of our closest friends and found him severely lacking. Finally came devastation, mixed with deep humiliation, as the full impact of my public assessment sank in. He stood up slowly, like an old man with sore joints, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper and more painful. It was the look of someone whose trust had been fundamentally betrayed by the person who was supposed to protect and cherish him most. He didn't say a word to anyone at the table, just turned and walked out of the restaurant with his dignity intact, but his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched through the window as he stood on the sidewalk for a moment, probably calling an Uber, before disappearing into the night. The remaining dinner was absolutely excruciating. Mike tried valiantly to make light conversation about work topics, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Jennifer kept shooting me disapproving looks while whispering urgently to Sarah. David seemed genuinely angry on Tom's behalf, barely speaking to me for the rest of the evening. When the check came, Mike insisted on paying for Tom's untouched meal, which somehow made me feel even worse about the entire situation. When I got home that night, I found Tom sitting on our couch in complete darkness, still wearing his dinner clothes, but looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. The only light came from the city skyline, through our living room window, casting shadows across his face that made him look like a stranger. He asked me quietly if I'd meant what I said, his voice so subdued I had to strain to hear him. When I tried to explain that I was just defending myself from his joke, he held up his hand to stop me. He said he didn't want to hear explanations or excuses. He just wanted to know if I really thought he was that inadequate as a lover and husband. The pain in his voice was devastating, but I was too proud and too angry to back down completely. I tried to tell him that his joke had embarrassed me first, that I felt humiliated when he brought up my intimate past in front of our friends like it was some kind of entertainment for the group. I pointed out that he'd started the conversation about numbers and experience, not me, and that I was just defending myself the only way I knew how. But Tom wasn't interested in who started what or who was more wrong in the situation. He said that attacking your spouse's intimate performance in front of friends was unforgivable, and that he'd never be able to look at those people again without remembering what I'd said about him. He told me he felt completely humiliated and didn't know how he was supposed to face our friend group, knowing they'd all heard me rank him and find him wanting. The next morning, Tom was gone before I woke up. He'd left a carefully written note on our kitchen counter saying he was staying at his brother Dave's place and needed space to think about our relationship. The note was written on our usual notepad in his familiar, careful handwriting, and seeing those familiar words on paper made the situation feel suddenly real and terrifying. I called him immediately when I found the note, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried texting multiple times throughout the day, but got no response. Over the next several days, Tom came home only to shower and change clothes, carefully timing his visits for when I was at work so we wouldn't have to interact. I could tell he'd been there by small signs scattered throughout the apartment, a different shirt missing from the closet, his coffee mug washed and put away in exactly the spot he always kept it, the lingering scent of his cologne in our bathroom. It felt like living with a ghost of my husband, someone who was present but completely unreachable. When we did occasionally cross paths, usually in the hallway or kitchen during unexpected timing, Tom would nod politely but avoid making eye contact with me. He moved through our apartment like a guest who was trying not to impose or disturb anything, careful not to leave evidence of his presence or create any opportunities for confrontation. The man who used to greet me with kisses and ask detailed questions about my day now treated me with the distant courtesy you'd show a roommate you barely knew. I tried everything I could think of to get his attention and break through the wall he'd erected between us. I cooked his favorite dinner, beef stroganoff with the expensive mushrooms he loved, and left it in the refrigerator with a heartfelt note explaining how sorry I was, but it remained completely untouched for 3 days until I finally threw it away. I bought tickets to a play we'd talked about seeing together and left them on his nightstand with another apology letter, but they disappeared without any acknowledgement or response. Our mutual friend started calling to check on us, having clearly sensed that something was seriously wrong after the disastrous dinner party. Mike called first, apologizing profusely for his role in starting the conversation about dating histories and numbers. He said he felt terrible about what had happened and asked if there was anything he could do to help fix things between Tom and me. I tried to downplay the situation, telling him it was just a silly argument that had gotten out of hand, but he didn't sound convinced by my casual dismissal. Sarah was much more direct when she called a few days later. She told me bluntly that what I'd said to Tom was cruel and humiliating, and that she couldn't understand why I'd want to hurt him that way in public. She pointed out that in all the years they'd known us as a couple, Tom had never said anything negative about me, never criticized me in front of friends, and had always been supportive and respectful. She said his comment at dinner had actually seemed like an attempt to show he was proud of my confidence and experience, not an attack. Jennifer called with a perspective that made everything feel even worse. She mentioned that Tom had contacted Mike personally to apologize for leaving dinner abruptly and causing an awkward situation for everyone. The fact that Tom felt he needed to apologize for being humiliated made her even more sympathetic toward him. She told me that in all the years she'd known Tom, he'd been nothing but kind, respectful, and supportive of me, and that watching him be publicly attacked had been genuinely painful for everyone at the table. Dave, Tom's brother, called me directly and was less diplomatic than our friends. He said Tom was completely devastated and questioning everything about our relationship. Dave mentioned that Tom had always been insecure about his limited experience compared to mine, and that my comment had confirmed his worst fears about how I really saw him. He suggested I think seriously about whether I wanted to save my marriage, because Tom was seriously considering whether it was worth saving. By the end of the second week, I was desperate and panicking about the direction things were heading. I wrote Tom a long, detailed letter, apologizing for my words and trying to explain how his joke had triggered my defensive response. I attempted to convey how much I loved him and how sorry I was for hurting him, but when I left it on his pillow, it appeared on the kitchen counter the next morning, completely unopened, with a note saying he wasn't ready to read it yet. That's when I truly understood that our marriage was in serious trouble. When I suggested counseling to Tom during one of our brief, awkward encounters in the kitchen, he just shook his head and said he needed to figure out his own feelings before involving anyone else in our problems. He looked absolutely exhausted, like he hadn't been sleeping well, and I noticed he'd lost noticeable weight since the dinner party. The stress of our situation was clearly taking a serious physical toll on him, which made me feel even more guilty about my role in creating this crisis. His parents called me, which was unprecedented in our relationship. They'd always been polite but somewhat distant, and we'd never had personal conversations without Tom present. His mother was coldly civil, asking if it was true that I'd humiliated their son in front of friends. When I tried to explain my side of the story, she cut me off and said she'd raised Tom to know his worth and expected his wife to treat him with basic respect. His father was even more direct, saying he hoped I understood what a good man I was married to and suggesting I think carefully about what I was throwing away. My own parents were equally unsupportive when I called seeking comfort and perspective. My mother said she was disappointed in my behavior and couldn't understand why I'd want to hurt Tom that way when he'd always been nothing but kind to me. She pointed out that Tom had been the best thing that ever happened to me and that I was risking the most stable, loving relationship I'd ever had. My father was more blunt, saying that if he were Tom, he'd probably be considering his options too. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning in the third week when I found Tom in our home office, researching divorce lawyers on his laptop. The screen showed a website for a prominent family law firm, and he had several browser tabs open with articles about uncontested divorce proceedings and property division in our state. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was exploring his options because he couldn't see a clear way forward for us as a couple. I begged him to reconsider, promising that I would do absolutely anything to make things right between us. I offered to go to individual therapy to work on my defensive reactions and communication style, to write personal letters to all our friends apologizing for the scene I'd created, to do whatever it took to rebuild his trust and repair our relationship. But Tom said the damage went much deeper than just that one comment at dinner. He told me that every time he tried to be intimate with me now, he would think about my words and wonder if I was mentally comparing him to other men and finding him lacking. He said he'd always been somewhat insecure about his limited experience compared to mine, but he'd trusted that I was satisfied with our relationship. My comment had shattered that trust and made him question whether I'd ever really been happy with him physically, or if I'd just been settling for someone who was good enough in other ways. That conversation was absolutely devastating because I realized Tom wasn't just hurt about the public embarrassment. He was fundamentally questioning his worth as a partner and his ability to satisfy me. My comment had attacked something essential to his identity as a man and husband, something that couldn't be easily fixed with apologies or promises to do better in the future. 3 days later, a courier delivered divorce papers to my office at work. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, and my name typed on the professional label looked official and final. Tom had already moved out completely while I was at work, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind everything we'd bought together as a couple. The apartment felt enormous and empty without his presence, like a stage set after all the actors had gone home for the night. The first week after Tom moved out was devastating on multiple levels that I hadn't anticipated. I called his brother Dave repeatedly, but Dave was clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle of our marital crisis, and said Tom was hurting badly and needed space to process what had happened. When I pressed him for more details about Tom's emotional state, Dave told me his brother felt completely humiliated and was questioning everything about our relationship, wondering if I'd ever really been satisfied with him or if I'd just been settling. I tried reaching out through our mutual friends, but they were also reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a private marital matter. Mike and Jennifer felt partially responsible for starting the conversation that led to our catastrophic fight, but they also admitted they were genuinely shocked by what I'd said to Tom. Sarah was more direct about her feelings, saying that watching me humiliate Tom in public had been painful for everyone present, and that she couldn't understand how I could be so cruel to someone who obviously adored me. When I couldn't reach Tom directly through any normal channels, I started showing up at places I knew he might be, hoping to force a conversation. I waited outside his gym one evening for over an hour, but when he finally emerged and saw me standing by his car, he turned around and went back inside rather than deal with the confrontation. I tried going to his favorite coffee shop on Saturday morning, thinking I might catch him during his usual weekend routine, but he must have changed his habits completely because he never showed up. The divorce papers were thorough and surprisingly fair, which somehow made them even more painful to read. Tom wasn't trying to punish me financially or make the legal process difficult. He just wanted out of our marriage as cleanly and quickly as possible. He'd proposed splitting our joint savings account 50-50 and had already made arrangements to refinance our apartment so I could buy out his half of the equity if I wanted to keep it. His efficiency in handling all the legal and financial aspects made it clear that he'd been planning this move for days, not making an impulsive decision based on temporary anger. I hired my own divorce attorney, who explained that Tom's proposed terms were extremely generous and that fighting the divorce would be expensive and likely unsuccessful given our circumstances. Since we'd only been married 4 years and had no children together, the court would probably grant the divorce quickly, regardless of any objections I might raise. My lawyer suggested that I accept Tom's terms gracefully and try to move forward with rebuilding my life. The social consequences of our divorce were almost as painful as losing Tom himself. Our entire friend group felt awkward and uncomfortable about the situation, and social gatherings became tense affairs where people had to choose sides or avoid inviting both of us to the same events. Most of our married friends seemed to identify more strongly with Tom's position, viewing what I'd said as a fundamental betrayal of the trust and loyalty that marriage required. My single friends were initially more supportive of my perspective, but several of them eventually admitted they were surprised and disturbed by the level of cruelty I'd shown. One friend told me she could understand being angry and defensive, but that attacking someone's confidence in such a public way seemed unnecessarily vicious. Another pointed out that Tom had been genuinely trying to be supportive with his joke about my experience, and that my response was completely disproportionate to his harmless comment. Dating after the divorce was significantly complicated by the reputation I'd developed in our social circles. Word had spread quickly through our network about what had happened at the dinner party, and men I met through mutual friends seemed hesitant to get involved with someone who had such a history of publicly humiliating her husband. When I tried using dating apps to meet people outside our social circle, I found myself constantly wondering if potential partners somehow knew my story, and several promising first dates ended awkwardly when the conversation naturally turned to discussing previous relationships and what had gone wrong. The men I did manage to date for any length of time seemed constantly worried about being compared to my previous partners, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where they became so anxious about their performance that our physical relationship suffered. One guy I saw for several weeks finally admitted that he was intimidated by my intimate experience and afraid he wouldn't measure up to my standards. Another ended things abruptly after I casually mentioned having had more serious relationships than him, saying he didn't want to compete with my memories and didn't trust that I wouldn't eventually find him lacking too. My work life became increasingly difficult as well, since several of my colleagues knew Tom professionally through industry connections, and word of our messy divorce had spread through our professional networks. While no one said anything directly to my face, I could sense people talking about the situation behind my back and judging my character based on the stories they'd heard. The stress of dealing with personal drama while trying to maintain professional relationships and meet work deadlines was emotionally exhausting. I had to take on additional freelance projects to supplement my income because maintaining our apartment on just my salary was financially challenging. The extra work meant longer hours and less time for socializing or self-care, which further isolated me from the support systems I desperately needed during this difficult period. I found myself working most weekends and many evenings just to keep up with all my financial obligations. Living alone in our apartment was a constant, painful reminder of everything I'd lost and thrown away. Every room contained vivid memories of our life together. The kitchen, where we'd cooked weekend breakfasts. The living room, where we'd watched movies and planned our future. The bedroom, where we'd been intimate and shared our deepest thoughts. I found myself constantly replaying our relationship and wondering if there had been clear signs of Tom's intimate insecurity that I'd somehow missed or ignored. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before during our marriage. How Tom would sometimes seem uncertain or hesitant during our intimate moments. How he'd frequently ask if I was satisfied or enjoying myself. How he'd watch my face carefully for reactions and validation. I'd been so focused on appreciating his emotional support, financial stability, and consistent kindness that I'd failed to recognize the signs of his deeper physical insecurities and fears about measuring up to my more experienced past. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Tom at a bookstore in our old neighborhood. He was with an attractive woman who had a quiet, understated elegance that was completely different from my more dramatic style. They were holding hands and looking at travel books together, clearly planning some kind of romantic trip. Tom saw me across the store and nodded politely with the kind of distant courtesy you'd show a casual acquaintance, but there was no warmth or recognition in his expression. Before I wrap this up, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. I left the bookstore feeling hollow and completely defeated. Tom had clearly moved on and was building a new, happier life with someone who valued him properly and would never use his vulnerabilities against him. Meanwhile, I was still dealing with the ongoing consequences of one moment of defensive cruelty that had destroyed the best, most stable relationship I'd ever had in my life. The worst part was finally understanding that my comment hadn't even been remotely true. Tom might not have been the most experienced or adventurous lover I'd ever had, but he'd been by far the most caring, attentive, and genuinely concerned with my pleasure and satisfaction. He'd always been completely focused on making me happy during our intimate moments, and our physical relationship had been consistently loving and fulfilling, even if it wasn't wildly passionate or experimental. In trying to hurt him for embarrassing me with his joke, I'd thrown away someone who genuinely cared about my happiness and well-being above his own ego. Hearing about Tom's engagement forced me to confront the painful reality that I'd lost him permanently and completely. He wasn't going to forgive me or give our relationship another chance. He'd found someone who appreciated what he offered and would never make him feel inadequate or unworthy of love. I'd had 4 precious years with a man who'd loved me unconditionally and consistently, and I'd destroyed it all with one cruel comment made in a moment of anger and public embarrassment.